Good morning. So I don't have a PhD. I have a master's in Russian studies, which helps me understand the environmental community. So I live in Seattle. I live in the heart of sort of environmental leftism and ideology, and so it gives me an opportunity to see them up front. And I'm really glad we're talking about the environmental benefits, because the previous panel talked about prosperity and how fossil fuels and energy bring prosperity. And I think it's very hard to argue with that. Occasionally the left will try to argue that green energy and other things like that will create prosperity. And the argument typically goes something along the lines, other people will pay more, but you will benefit. And this sort of reminds me of the slogan of Chilkoot Charlie's, which is a bar in Anchorage. Anybody been to Chilkoot Charlie's or know about Chilkoot Charlie's? Right here. Do you remember what the slogan is? So it's on the front door of Chilkoot Charlie's, and people who go into Chilkoot Charlie's don't typically remember what they read when they come out of Chilkoot Charlie's. But the slogan is, we cheat the other guy and pass the savings on to you. Okay. That is, in many ways, what the environmental left argues about how green energy creates prosperity, which is that subsidies and other things like that, paid for by other people, will help you, but we all know that at the end of the day, prices go up and everybody pays the high price for their environmental policies. So they don't actually argue that very much. They say, it's okay, even if it costs more, it's still worth it. And it's worth helping the environment. And the fact is that what's very clear is that the free market and technology and entrepreneurial spirit are better at creating an environmental sustainable future than the ideas of the environmental left. And let me just start by giving you a sense of what the environmental left thinks of as sustainable. So National Geographic has what they call their Green Dex, which is the index of green countries. And they rank countries based on sustainability. And they use a variety of different measures to say, here are the most environmentally sustainable countries in the world. Number one, can anybody guess what number one in the world for environmental sustainability? North Korea. They're very close. See, Myron cheats. He has a good sense of it. Anybody else have a guess? It's not North Korea. Zimbabwe. You're on the right track. It's actually India. India is number one on their list of most sustainable. I don't know if you've seen the news this week, but Mumbai right now is having air pollution so bad that one day of breathing in Mumbai is like smoking 50 cigarettes. That's number one on National Geographic's list of green countries. Number two, China. China. This is their concept. Their concept is that poverty is sustainable and prosperity is not. We know that that's nonsense. Compare the air quality in Mumbai or Beijing to New York. Which of those three cities produces the most in terms of GDP, has the highest standard of living, and which of those three cities has the best air quality? It's not even a contest. It is prosperity that helps the environment, not poverty. In fact, the United Nations last year put out a report on air quality around the world. And what they found is that there was actually some good news, that a number of cities were improving their air quality. They said, encouragingly, there is evidence from the World Health Organization data that many cities are addressing air pollution. More than half of the monitored cities in high-income countries, and more than one-third of those in low- and middle-income countries reduced their air pollution levels by more than 5%. But where they found the problem was that air pollution was getting worse in low and some middle-income countries. High-income countries, improving air quality; low-income countries, seeing it worse. Economic prosperity and entrepreneurial capitalism is what creates a clean environment. And that, we have to remember that. The challenge for those of us who believe in the free market, though, is that environmentalism has become synonymous with left-wing government policies, and we need to stop that. We need to recognize and be proud of the fact that the things that we do are better for the environment, not just better for prosperity. Look at a political map. Look at the 2016 election map. Where are the red parts of the map and where are the blue parts? Environmentalists sequester themselves surrounded by concrete and steel and asphalt in big cities, where nature has been paved over. Conservatives live where there is nature. They work the land. They live on the land. They choose to do that because they love the environment. And we have allowed the left to tell us, those of us who live near the land, that we don't care about the environment while they lecture us from big cities. And we need to stop doing that, because we not only care about prosperity, we care about the environment. And I understand, coming from a city, frankly, where there's a lot of crazy left-wing ideas, I understand why we have that reaction, because our concern is that when you talk about the environment, that it's really a Trojan horse for big government bad ideas. And you know what? It is. In many cases it is, that they use the environment to justify left-wing policies. But we have to come up with our own policies and show that our ideas are better for the environment. And let me give you a few examples. Deforestation around the world, people argue is a concern, that it's bad for the environment, it's bad for habitat, it harms climate. But the areas of the world where you find deforestation, you're not finding deforestation or people cutting down trees to build houses. They're cutting down trees to cook their food and heat their homes. If you replaced cutting down trees with natural gas, they would not only live better lives, but the environment would be cleaner. Because natural gas is a better form of energy. It is cleaner, right? You don't have people who are burning wood in their home and getting asthma and other problems. It is better for people and the environment. The solutions that the free market brings are along the lines of former Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom, who was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in economics. And what she found is that top-down government solutions are often suit the government but not people. And that the best environmental solutions are those that solve what is called, what you've heard of, the tragedy of the commons, where nobody has a property right and everybody, takes as much as they can before the resource is gone. The best solutions to those are cooperative. And technology allows us to do more now in a cooperative way to help the environment than ever before. So let me give you a few examples of this. In Seattle, and I'm sure in a number of other places, you have what's called Car2Go, which are these little blue smart cars. They're little two-seaters, and you can, there's no taxi or there's no Uber, there's no transit, and you could say, you know what, I need this car for a little while. You walk up to the car with your phone, you open the car, you rent that car for a few hours, drive where you need to go, and then you park it in a designated spot. The city of Seattle did a study and found that Car2Go was so effective that there are now 9,000 fewer cars in Seattle because people rely on Car2Go and Uber rather than buying themselves a car. That reduces the amount of space that people need to park their cars, it saves them money, it reduces the resources that are used to buy the vehicles. Car2Go, by the way, is not a government program. It is an entrepreneurial program. And it has been so successful that other companies like BMW are now introducing their own version of the program. The other thing about Car2Go is that if the average trip has 1.5 passengers, because the cars are only 2 seats, the fuel efficiency is actually the same as riding on transit. So not only do you have the flexibility, not only do you get to use it when you want and go exactly where you want rather than sort of nearby, it reduces the total amount of cars on the road, and it saves energy and electricity and gas, rather. That's just one example. Let me give you another example. The Endangered Species Act, when it was created, we said, okay, we want to protect habitat for animals that are endangered so that they can come back. And what we've seen with the Endangered Species Act is that we're not seeing animals recover. And the primary reason, or a primary reason, is that the Endangered Species Act punishes people who have habitat, who want to help the species in danger. So one of the first things that you see with the Endangered Species Act is that when an animal is listed, the amount of habitat goes down. because people who have habitat and are subject to the restrictions get rid of it. So the first thing the Endangered Species Act does to an animal is harm that habitat for that animal. But there is an alternative, which is to work with landowners to reward them for helping the environment. So Cornell University created an app called eBird. Are there any birders here? Anybody go bird watching? I'm sure there are some. Okay, so people are shy. Okay, Betty. North Dakota is a hard place to go bird watching. So there's an app where you can list what birds that you've seen, when you've seen them, where you see them, and it keeps track of your life list. And if you don't know what the bird is, you can say, well, here's where I saw it in the color, and it'll say, oh, it's probably this bird, and you can choose it. You say, great. So eBird, as a result of this, has millions and millions of data points from people across the world, primarily in the United States, but across the world, entering their life lists and the birds that they've seen. So Cornell University teamed up with the Nature Conservancy in California and said, okay, we want to provide habitat for migratory birds in the Central Valley of California. So Cornell University, because they had this data, was able to say, okay, where are the best places for migratory birds? And what they found is that rice fields in that area were very valuable during January and February. So they went to the rice farmers and they did a reverse auction. How much would we have to pay you to create habitat on your land during a time when you're not harvesting? And the farmer said, well, if you paid me this much, I would flood these fields and we could do that. And they did it. And it worked. And the beauty is that because of the technology that they had, they were able to go out there and say, okay, are these lands really being used by migratory birds? They could make sure that it happened, and they rewarded, rather than punished, landowners for doing it. That was a cooperative solution that is available to us because we now have the technology. This is the fundamental choice between left-wing environmentalism and free market environmentalism. Left-wing environmentalism says you need to change the way you live. You're too rich. You're using too many resources. You ought to be more like India and less like the United States. Free market environmentalism says we're going to give you the technology and the ability to do more with less. The free market is the best system ever designed for doing more with less and making the best use of resources. That's what environmental concern is fundamentally about, is making the best use of resources. And we ought to be proud to say that. And we need to say it more often, because when people think that they're concerned about the environment or have an environmental concern, they feel like they can only go in one direction. So I used to work at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources in Washington State, where we dealt with spotted owl and old growth. And so when you ask people, who do you trust on forestry? Do you trust the environmental community or timber industry? And even in Washington State, more people trusted the timber industry than the environmental community. People don't trust the environmental left. They know that they're crazy, but they don't know where to go. And it's sort of like the moth that went to the dentist, and the moth says, Doc, I'm having a horrible time. I lost my job. My wife is leaving me. My kids hate me. I'm depressed all the time. I don't know what to do. And the dentist looks at the moth and says, well, I'm really sorry to hear that, but why did you come to me? And the moth says, well, your light was on. Right? Too many times, people who don't trust the environmental community end up going to the environmental community for environmental solutions because they don't know where else to turn. We need to start being proud of the fact that we care about the environment and say very clearly that the free market is the best way to help the environment, not by forcing people to change the way they live, not by forcing people into poverty, but by harnessing prosperity and technology to create a more sustainable environmental future. Thank you so much.